I'm delighted to be the moderator of a conversation this afternoon with two women whom I have grown to respect and admire. Well, I respected and admired them from a distance a while ago, but working together to put together this discussion this afternoon has only elevated my admiration for the work that Lisa Bloom and Marjory Fisher do in the era of the MeToo movement and the national conversation that is going on around sexual harassment. Lisa is the founder of the Bloom firm, which is a civil rights law firm that represents people who are exploring how their civil rights can be defended. She is also an author. Go out and buy her books, everyone, after the session, as well as a TV commentator and had a show on Court TV for a number of years. So we have a real media star, and it's going to be wonderful to have this conversation with you, Lisa. And to my far right is Marjory Fisher, who is Columbia University's Title IX coordinator, responsible for all of Columbia University's policies and procedures and the implementation of their programs in compliance with Title IX, which is, as I mentioned in the aperitif this morning, which is a regulation under the 1964 Civil Rights Civil Rights Act, that defines sexual harassment as sex discrimination and thereby prohibited in national or federally funded institutions around the country nationally. So let's get off to a start. This is going to be a discussion. We will have an opportunity for a very robust question and answer session at the end of the conversation that the three of us will have. And so Lisa and Marjory, could you guys just introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your work and what you do?
Go ahead. Hello, everyone. So I'm Lisa Bloom. I'm the owner and founder of the Bloom firm. I think we are one of the largest and fastest growing civil rights law firms in the country. We primarily do sexual harassment, sexual assault cases, but we do any kind of discrimination, harassment, or assault case. I have been a practicing attorney for about 32 years, except for an 8-year gap in the 2000s where I was a full-time Court TV anchorwoman, and I also was a legal analyst on CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS. I made the rounds of all of them. In 2009, I decided I was tired of just commenting on what other people were doing in the law, and I wanted to get back in the game and be a doer again. So I founded my law firm, and our goal is to really help as many people as we can in this area, and it is an area with a great deal of need. I think a lot of lawyers want to practice in this area, but they find it to be very difficult emotionally, which it is, and difficult to make a go of it economically, which is also a challenge. One of the cases I'm probably best known for is taking down Bill O'Reilly last year. So I represented 3 women who accused Bill O'Reilly, who then had the #1 cable show on all of cable news. 6 women had accused him of sexual harassment, and he had signed confidential settlements with all of them. So we knew, frankly, it just enraged me that he could have sexually harassed so many women and still kept his job, especially when some of those allegations were that he had called his female staffers while he was masturbating, and they had tapes of it, and he still had his job. And something had to give. So I represented a woman named Wendy Walsh, who happened to be a dear friend of mine. She said a reporter came to me and said, Wendy, did Bill O'Reilly ever sexually harass you? And she said, Lisa, he did, but I'm afraid to come out. I'm afraid to give my name. All my friends are telling me I shouldn't. What do you think I should do? And I said, Wendy, if women like you and I, she's around my age, 50s, if we don't speak out, if we don't do something, who is going to do something? Who's going to change things for our daughters? And if he sues you for defamation, I will represent you for free. And I'll tell you something else, Wendy. This has gone on too long. If you speak out, we're going to take him down, and I'm going to protect you. And that's what we did. So we had a 3-week-long campaign to draw out other accusers. We eventually drew out 2 other accusers, vetted their stories, had a legal and media strategy, and at the end of it, he was gone. This was before the MeToo movement. Of course, with the advent of the MeToo movement, we've got a lot more people, a lot more calls, cases against a lot of very prominent people. I have an active child sexual abuse case against Congressman Tony Cardenas currently. I represented a sexual harassment accuser of Congressman John Conyers, leading to his resignation last year. I represent 4 women accusing Paul Marciano at Guess of groping them, and he recently was required to step down as a result. So we're very busy, we're very active, and that's just a little taste of what we do.
Marjory, I might add that you were also bureau chief of the Sex Crimes Bureau of the Queen's DA's office. So you've really been in the thick of this before you went on to help young people to avoid being involved in these unlawful acts, but also acts that can result in enormous shifts in their lives and the outcome of their lives.
So yes, I began my career as an attorney in what I call the bloody 80s in the Brooklyn DA's office, when there were over 2,000 murder cases a year in New York City. Now there's less than 200, I believe, and that's probably high. And I very quickly started prosecuting rape cases and homicides. And I spent 8 years there, and then I moved to the Queen's DA's office, where I prosecuted sex crimes cases as the Bureau Chief of the Special Victims Bureau, and I handled all felony sexual assaults, child abuse cases, and child homicide cases, and many domestic violence cases where there was a sex crime involved. And from there, I spent 22 years there, and then I joined a firm just as things on campus were really breaking, right around the time that Jerry Sandusky and Penn State happened, and the Obama administration really started taking a hard look at the numbers of young, mostly women, who were sexually assaulted on campus. And I joined an investigative firm at that point that had a sexual misconduct consulting and investigations division, and I traveled the country doing investigations for colleges and universities, because at that time, you know, it was just as likely as not that the bookstore director was the Title IX coordinator. And so I worked there for 2 years, and I ended up as the Title IX coordinator at Columbia University, where I oversee all investigations involving sexual harassment, sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, and domestic violence. And just to give you a sense of what I've seen, because I spoke with my wonderful colleagues here about sort of being a witness to the arc of history in these kinds of cases. I couldn't pick a more amazing 30 years to be part of this, because when I started as a DA, there was, in order to prove a rape, just within the decade before I started, a rape victim would have to have corroboration for her account. In other words, a witness, scientific evidence, or something, which there was almost never. These are not crimes that are committed in Macy's window. And at that time, there was no DNA evidence. The victim would also have to prove that she earnestly resisted in order to have a conviction. And so I believe in the mid-70s, there were 1,800 arrests for rape in New York City and 18 convictions.
Wow.
Because you couldn't get a conviction. You know, fast forward to now, and I'm sure we'll talk about many of the things that have happened, but what I've seen through my career is just nothing short of amazing. You know, back in the 90s, I had a boss who told me a man can't rape his wife. And now, you know, the laws have changed enormously. Back in those days, if a woman came into me and said, "But I said no," I would have to say, "There's nothing really I can do for you," because a rape victim would have to prove that she was forced, that her life was threatened, or that she was incapacitated or disabled in some way in order to prove that a rape in the first degree happened. Now, New York State has a no means no law, and look at the campuses. In every campus across the country, practically, the standard is that there must be affirmative consent for all sexual acts. And so I feel like I've been lucky lucky to see the progress. And every time I get upset and depressed when I see what's happening, you know, from our president on down, I think about the progress that's been made. You know, I started what I just described, and now we have MeToo. We have judges who are well equipped and understand the dynamics of sexual assault. We have special victim squads in every police department in every major city across the country, and hospital units who handle these cases. And we have a Title IX coordinator, at least for now, in pretty much every campus that receives federal funding in the United States, overseeing these cases, and more of them are former sex crimes prosecutors. So I will say that I'm lucky, and I feel very fortunate to be speaking to you about the changes that I've seen over the years.
But Marjory, aren't there still examples of people using marital status and relationship status as the basis for denying that sexual assault has taken place? What does it really mean today?
Well, the bottom line is there are, as far as I know, there are no laws anymore that say that, you know, marital status would defend you from a charge of rape. That doesn't mean that there are jurors out there that you don't have to speak to very seriously before you choose them about what their point of view is if the victim is a wife who is accusing her husband or a man who is accusing his husband. And so I think there are preconceived notions that exist, and a good prosecutor is going to fully explore them when they're speaking to the jury before they pick them. But the laws have come a long way. I mean, in New York City, every county has what's called a family justice center, which is like a one-stop shop. A woman comes in who's in any kind of romantic relationship or marriage, you know, and it doesn't have to be a marriage, and can go there, and they help her with everything from the prosecution to getting a divorce, to help with their children, to counsel them on how to get out, to give them a safety plan. And so things have changed.
Lisa, how does this affect your practice? What are you seeing in terms of the women who come to you, or men, or the women who claim to have been violated? What do you see?
Well, you're asking about the MeToo movement and how it's affected everything. So it's definitely having an effect. I think we're at the very beginning. People ask me, you know, is it almost over? Not hardly. I think we're at like maybe the 1% mark. Just about every woman has a MeToo story. I don't think any woman is particularly surprised at all the stories of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual abuse, but a lot of men are. I think a lot of good men are surprised that so many women have been victimized. I'm a victim of sexual assault. I'm a victim of sexual harassment. Many of us have experienced it multiple times. Many women think, well, I just thought this was part of life. I thought being prey was just part of my life, and maybe it doesn't have to be anymore. I mean, this is a real revelation for a lot of us. What I see in my cases since MeToo is more people willing to stand with my client. Whereas it used to be, she would come to me and say she was raped, she was sexually harassed, and I would say, okay, we're gonna take you through this process. We're gonna empower you. And the odds are very high that we're gonna win, because most of the time we do. But emotionally, who are you gonna count on as you go through this process? And she would say like, oh, you know, my husband doesn't want me to do this. My mom is trying to talk me out of it. My best friend says, you know, I don't do it. Now I'm seeing people really rallying around, and that's very heartening to me. I have a client, my client Andrea Buera, who was accusing the rap singer Trey Songz, R&B singer Trey Songz, of assaulting her, beating her up. She went home that morning, thank God Aunt Tracy was there, and Aunt Tracy said, girl, why are you covered with bruises? And well, you know, he beat me up. And Tracy says, you're going to the police right now, and you're going to the hospital, and I'm gonna help you, and I'm gonna be there with you. Thank God for Aunt Tracy, right? I need an Aunt Tracy in all of my cases, and I'm having more Aunt Tracys. I think people are really willing to stand with women in a way that's different, and that's very helpful for the cases.
So what are you seeing, Marjory? There are often criticized the campuses and programs of your sort that we somehow treat sexual assault on campuses different than we do on the street corner. that if a woman is sexually assaulted on the street corner, she ends up at the police in jail. If a student is sexually harassed on campus by a fellow student, that they're likely to end up before a tribunal of professors who don't really know a lot about sexual harassment and sexual assault adjudication. How do you answer those questions, or that skepticism?
That's an excellent question, and most people are really surprised that young women who are sexually assaulted on campus, even cases where there are injuries, where there's likely to be scientific evidence, if they report right away, do not go to the police. I would say between 80 and 90% opt not to go to the police. And in New York State, where I work, there are rules. There's a law governing campus sexual assault called Enough is Enough. And what it specifies is that any victim on campus has the right to access the police or not, and cannot be shamed into going to the police by a professor or someone that he or she reports to. So it's really up to them, and they have many reasons for not going to the police. But more and more, it's not professors that are on the panels. It is, in our office, there are professional student conduct people who sit on a panel, and the federal government requires that anybody who interfaces with a case like this has to be trained. I spent my 2 years at a consulting company going all over the country training panels of adjudicators about the dynamics of this very unique crime. And so I do think that in the past 10 years, since President Obama said nobody should have to endure this kind of thing alone, and really put a tremendous amount of effort into changing the way colleges were handling these cases, things have changed considerably.
And do you think that doing that helps to change the system, that in the way that women are treated when they come into the system? Lisa, what do you think about that? That are we doing enough to say, we're not going to have all these ancillary activities going on, we're going to really hold the criminal justice system responsible for prosecuting, if not persecuting, people who violate women's bodies?
I think that's a really important question. And by the way, let me just say that I'm here because Faye Wattleton asked me to come, and that's really all I needed to know. She is a feminist icon, lifelong advocate for women's reproductive rights, and I am just really honored to be sitting this close to her.
And both of you are here because of all of the fantastic work that you do.
And I'm taking my daughter to college tomorrow. How scary is that? And so I only came because Faye asked me to come.
So there's a few people in this world who ask me something, and the answer is going to be yes. But it's a very important question. I think we all have to ask ourselves, why don't women trust the justice system after they've been sexually assaulted? Why do only 10% of us go to the police? Okay, it's not because 90% of women are stupid or crazy or lazy, it's because we have good reason not to trust the criminal justice system. So I have taken a lot of women to the police, even though I'm a civil attorney, I do lawsuits for money damages, but when there's a crime, I want them to go to the police. I want them to report it to the police as well. I don't like confidential settlements. We can talk about that a little bit more later. But I took, for example, my 2 accusers of Steven Seagal, who accused him of rape, to the police. I took my client, Nicole Eggert, who accuses Scott Baio of sexually abusing her as a child, to the police. I take a lot of people to the police. The police are very professional and nice and take a report. And that's generally the end of the story, because many of these stories, the biggest hurdle is the statute of limitations, which is the time deadline. Every predator's best friend, the statute of limitations. You run down the clock, you get a get out of jail free card. So that's a big problem in the law. That's not the police's fault. When somebody does have a timely claim and they go to the police, they often tell me, the police don't follow up, they don't call my witnesses, they don't take it seriously. Most rapes are acquaintance rapes, and I think there are still some pretty strong attitudes of, why did you go there? Why were you with him? Why did you see him the next day? Why did you call him the next week? I was just at the Bill Cosby criminal trial. I represented Janice Dickinson. I represent, present tense, Janice Dickinson, one of his accusers, and she testified in that trial. And there was a wonderful witness, expert witness, who talked about the fact that the vast majority of acquaintance rape victims will continue to have a relationship with the perpetrator afterwards. I mean, that's just the research. we may say that's crazy, that's weird, but it's because of the denial and the shame and the fear, and they continue the relationship. So a lot of these myths still are out there, that if you're assaulted, you're immediately going to run away and never talk to the person again. But especially when it's a powerful person and you have a relationship and your family has a relationship, it continues afterwards. So we have to bust the myths, I think, with the police. I think there has to be a lot better training. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these very low numbers of women going to the police.
So it's kind of interesting that you bring up the shaming question. We talked a little bit about this prior to the panel, just prior to the panel, and I had shared with the two of you that I sort of looked up the word shaming on Wikipedia, and to my surprise, shaming was used as a major form of prosecution in the 19th century. It seemed to have fallen out of favor in the 20th century. I mean, if we listen this morning to Kurt Anderson, anything goes kind of attitude, but that it's coming back in favor now. And so this whole business of shaming, and a lot of what goes on in college campuses is around reducing the shame for women and elevating the shame, or for the assaultant, elevating the shaming for the reduction of shaming, rather, for the victim.
So on campus,
inelegantly,
no,
but you understand what I mean.
So on campus, you know, there's federal privacy laws that really prevent any publicity about if it's a student who's the perpetrator, you know, to do any kind, you know, shaming isn't done by the administration. But there are more and more activist organizations that students are flocking to, and they discuss it. And social media is a powerful tool for shaming. And so I, as part of the administration, and my colleagues don't engage in that and will not engage in that. But on the other hand, if it's a faculty member, for example, who is the perpetrator, or a staff person at a university, the press can, you know, do a lot of that. Just this past week, there was an article in the Times about a case at NYU where a feminist philosophy professor was accused of sexually harassing a PhD student. Many of you may have read about it. And they covered both sides of the argument, what the feminist community, philosophy community did to try and support her, and what they said about this young man. It was very, very interesting. So I would say that, you know, as a college administrator, can't engage in that, but there are plenty of people that do go ahead and do it. As I'm sure.
Speaking of the robust capacity to do that, the MeToo movement was sort of launched, or got its energy, its recent energy, from social media. And I was struck by looking a little bit historically at it, that within 24 hours after the first posting, there were over 500,000 postings saying, wow, Me Too, that has happened to me. And I think that this really is kind of a sobering moment as to how powerful social media can be for good and as well as for bad. So what do we hear now about the possibilities of these policies being rolled back?
Well, so first of all, let me say something about shaming in media, if I may. And I went to the social media panel, which was excellent and convinced me that social media is terrible. However, there are some really fabulous uses, and that's one of them, is giving a voice to the voiceless, and the Me Too movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and a lot of social justice movements that are really amplified because of social media and get people out into the streets. And so I am a fan, and I am an active user on Twitter. The cases that I do are always very lopsided. My client has no money, and on the other side, it's a billionaire. And we all know that in the legal system, if you have money, you have a tremendous advantage. Okay, they're not always a billionaire. It might be Bill Cosby, who's maybe worth $400 million. Okay, my client's worth zero.
Well, wait a minute, Lisa. Why is that? Is it because there are no good-hearted lawyers who are willing to take these cases? Or,
it's not just good-hearted. There are a lot of good-hearted lawyers. Some of my friends here are good. It's not just good-hearted. You have to be able to do these cases in a sustainable way. You know, you can do these cases for a year and then you go out of business because you can't pay your insurance and your rent and your staff. So that's, you know, the economics of law firm is a whole other topic I could get into. But I want to say this about media, okay? Bill Cosby's got a lot of money. Steve Wynn, who I had 3 clients against, is a billionaire who's unemployed right now. And so he's got a lot of time on his hands to be vindictive. And he's personally sued me for defamation because I said I represent 3 women accusing Steve Wynn of sexual harassment. I do represent 3 women accusing Steve Wynn of sexual harassment, or at least I did at that time. So what can I do, right? I have to be creative. I can't compete with them on their own ground, on their own turf. As the great Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. What do we have on our side? We have media. We have social media. We have public shaming. Public shaming is what took down Bill O'Reilly and a lot of these other guys, okay? It wasn't litigating for, in New York, 5 to 10 years before we get to trial. Are you kidding? Is my client going to be able to withstand that? In California, 2 to 4 years before we get to trial? So I'm going to use whatever legal tools are available in my arsenal, and going to the press is a very effective tool for victims.
So Marjory, you dealt with a mattress being carried
I did
around.
Not deal with a mattress.
Well, your predecessors
yes.
dealt with a mattress
yes.
being hauled around, and that was another form of public shaming as a part of this whole ecosystem of MeToo.
That's true. That occurred before I became the Title IX coordinator at Columbia. And
are you saying it wouldn't have occurred if you'd been there?
I can't really comment on that, but I will tell you that
I was on the board, so
yes.
I can take the burden on that.
Yes. Okay. So you know, and Emma Solkowitz became very iconic. You know, she was on the cover of many magazines. She was at the State of the Union address, and she really, you know, she disagreed with the finding of the university, and that was what she did. And you know, the name of the perpetrator became out there, and she became, you know, the face of campus sexual assault. And, you know, I can't comment one way or the other about that case, but what I will say is that, you know, now that there are people who are, you know, skilled in these kinds of very unique investigations and understand, you know, that people might not disclose for a year, and people might not, as Lisa said, behave in a way consistent that we might expect ourselves or our daughters to behave after they were sexually assaulted. I think the results have been much better. And so you were asking before, how are things changing? What is changing under the current administration? And you know, people are very concerned about that. Betsy DeVos has taken this on. She has Candace Jackson as the head of the Office of Civil Rights, who's in charge of enforcing that. And about 6 months ago, she said something like, in most investigations, there's not even an accusation that these accused students overrode the will of a young woman. 90% of them fall into the category of, we were both drunk, we broke up, and 6 months later I found myself under a Title IX investigation because she just decided that our last sleeping together was not quite right. God. She ended up apologizing for this, but you know, there's concern about you know, the future. So far, there's been a few suggested changes in the law from the Trump administration, mostly to basically increase due process for those who are accused. This is not necessarily a bad thing or something that we can't deal with as the people who investigate these things. But so far, I don't know a single university in the country that has changed their policies in response to, they have withdrawn some of these dear colleague letters that have advise colleges and universities about how to handle these cases, and they're recommending some changes, but so far they have not manifested in policy change except in a very minor way.
You know, I think you bring up a really important elephant in the room very often, and when there's a discussion about these cases, the impact of drugs and alcohol, and somehow we send our kids away to college, or presumably they want a career, and so they give in because of substance intervention that leaves them over to deciding later that that wasn't exactly what they had in mind. So let's talk about that. You know, when someone uses drugs or alcohol and gets in a car and injures someone else, they are held accountable. Is this about women, that we, you know, find some ancillary way to put something around this as opposed to what it is, or that she really wanted it, but I just thought that it was okay? I mean, these are the explanations that are as old as time. And are women doing enough to really change that? And by the way, women can also be assailants as well, and I think it's really important for us to recommend. We really are talking about human conduct.
In New York State, under the Students' Bill of Rights, a student cannot be blamed for the condition that they were in when they were sexually assaulted. Okay, that is New York State law. However, you know, there are students, you know, intoxication and incapacitation is the overlay in almost every case that we see. When I train students and I say, how many of you think you can consent if you are intoxicated? They all go, no, you can't consent. That's not true. You can't consent if you are incapacitated, which means that you don't know the who, what, when, where of what's going on. Your eyes can't remain open. You don't understand what's going on. That is the condition in which somebody cannot have sex with you. And that is what is prohibited by almost every university policy. So you can't blame people for that, getting into that situation, but I will tell you that I think our high schools do a lousy job of training students about what these policies say and what the rules are and what affirmative consent is and what incapacitation is. And that if, what I say to students is, if you are thinking about what that lady said when she came to my football team and she said, don't have sex with somebody who's falling over, who can't speak, who's in and out of consciousness, and you're asking yourself, are they intoxicated or merely intoxicated or truly incapacitated? It's time to go home.
Yeah.
Okay? Because if you are engaging in that analysis, you should leave. Because the bottom line is, who wants to be in the position of having sex with someone who was truly incapacitated and could not consent? So yes, Faye, that's true. It is present in probably 80% of the cases. You can't blame the victims, but I personally don't see anything wrong with, when I do drop my daughter off for her freshman year of college tomorrow, saying to her, you know what, don't drink till you can't even walk before you get to the party. You know, and some people would say that's victim blaming. I think it's just being honest about when you're putting yourself in a situation where you are like a sitting duck.
Say it to both genders,
Lisa,
right?
Lisa, I've been dying to ask you this question. Why would anybody put on a bathrobe and go naked to a door to meet? I mean,
One of the
what
great
is that
things
about?
that I think we are learning now, which is way overdue, is we don't ever need to have meetings in hotel rooms. Ever.
That's such a good rule.
There's no, never. And in my 32 years, this has always been a rule for me. We're going to meet in a public place. We'll meet in the coffee shop. We'll meet in the lobby. Oh, but why don't you just come out to my room? Nope. Nope, not coming up to your, what do you think I'm, nope, we're gonna meet in the coffee shop, right? So I think we can just eliminate that entirely. Everybody should be fully dressed. All body parts should be inside of clothing in business. I mean, I don't think it's that hard. I really don't.
But what if you think your career is on the line? Yeah, you can say quickly, and then we're gonna have to go to question and answer, so get your questions ready.
The alcohol thing, you know, what the problem I have is women being responsible for everybody's sexuality, which is still a very persistent myth, right? So the male and female are both drunk, but she's the one that gets blamed because she was drunk, right? This is still very much a mythology. There was something in the news today at a high school where everybody came back just today to this high school, and there was a big sign up, if girls will behave like ladies, then boys will behave like gentlemen. Okay, which maybe on first glance is like, well, that's kind of nice, but no, this is making girls responsible for everybody's behavior, right? And somebody crossed it out and said, if we teach boys to respect girls, then boys will behave like gentlemen, right? We have to be very alert to these myths that, listen, there's implicit gender bias, which 78% of men and women have, which means we have been sold a lot of myths that are deeply embedded now in our DNA, and even a feminist like me, still some of these things flit through my head. We have to be very vigilant to not buy into these myths.
Questions?
Go. All right.
My question is for Lisa. I'm Nancy Collins. I followed your career for a long time, and I've always been a fan. So it was, I have to say, very confusing for me when you started representing Harvey Weinstein.
So let me talk about that.
But wait a minute, even because there were rumors for years about him, fooling around with women. And so when did you find out and how?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I have this book, Suspicion Nation. It was being made into a documentary film series by Harvey Weinstein and Jay-Z. We were working on this issue of racism in the criminal justice system, which was very moving and important to me. I have spent most of my career banging on the door of men accused of wrongdoing and saying, you need to apologize, you need to make it right, you need to not go after the women. At the time that I was representing Harvey Weinstein, which was a few months, he was accused of verbal misconduct, not to employees, just to women in his industry. I want to emphasize that, because as soon as he was accused of sexual misconduct, I was out immediately. What I got him to do, which really didn't get much coverage, but when the story broke, was to apologize, acknowledge wrongdoing, and promise not to go after any of the women. That's what he said in his public statement. That's what I said in my public statement. I thought that was groundbreaking, because the 4 women who I represented against Donald Trump and the women I represented against Bill O'Reilly, what they all said my entire career was, why won't he just apologize? Then this can be over. Why do they have to go after me? Why do they have to attack me? I thought this was very important, and we can have a whole other discussion about apologies, which to this day I think are very important, and I would like to see more of, and I'd like to see people accept apologies. Now, when you're talking about sexual assault, or you're talking about rape, an apology doesn't get you anywhere, really. Okay?
Over to this side.
One for Marjory. There was a study of 60 top universities that said 25% of females reported on graduation that they had been harassed at some point or other. And what caught my attention was that more than half of those were people in positions of authority, professors or teaching assistants, going after students, not date rape. So my question to you is, in a large organization, how are you driving culture change? Aside from criminal prosecution on the back end, what can you do on the front end in a large organization to move the culture?
I think that's a terrific question. And if I tell you that I talk to, 3 or 4 groups of staff, faculty, and students a week, really anybody who asks, I will go. And I will talk about why these acts have such a huge impact and reduce educational opportunities and sometimes end up running people right out of the university. One of the most heartbreaking things I ever heard said was at a town meeting where a young woman said, I came here to study science. I'm not here to change the culture. That's your job. And so I will tell you that I am totally committed to that. You're probably talking about the AAU study, which said that 1 in 5 young women on college campuses complained of a sexual assault while they were on campus. And the bottom line is, what you should know about that is that it could be anything. It could be someone grabs my butt in a bar to a full-fledged rape. It could be a faculty member or my roommate's boyfriend. It could be anything. So it's a wide-ranging, very important study which is being repeated this year. And the question will be, have we made any difference? Because nothing can make a difference like getting out there and talking face-to-face to people. And the bottom line is, we got to do it before college. We got to start talking to kids in middle school and high school about what affirmative consent is and why it's important. And why wouldn't you want someone to be on the same page with you when you're engaging in a sexual act? But if we're not even, my own kid was at a high school where nobody said anything about it. Yes, they talked to them about how to put a condom on a banana, but other than that, that was it. And so I had to invite a huge group of girls to my synagogue so I could talk to them about playing it safe on campus and what they had a right to say if somebody was pushing them to do something they didn't want to do.
I might add, and let's see if we can get to as many of these as possible in the remaining 2 minutes. I think it's a community affair, and I think if you start it in junior high, it's too late.
Parents should be doing this.
This is really about family and parents. It's about the whole business of sexual exploitation from infancy on, and so it isn't somebody else's responsibility. This is a community responsibility. And as I mentioned this morning in the aperitif, when we did a survey in the early 2000s, we found that women said, this is the #1 issue in my life that I want to have addressed. That was almost 20 years ago. So this is deeply embedded in our society, and we all have to take responsibility for it. You're next.
I wanted to ask, sexual assault and rape, everything that you're talking about on campus, the kids are 18. Why is a university involved? Why doesn't it just go straight to the police? It's a crime. What is a university's place in being an intermediary or trying to adjudicate? Why is it?
Because if students know the case is going to the police, they will not report. I spent my, and the police cannot move the perpetrator from the room that he is or she is in next door to the victim, and can't take the perpetrator out of the classroom that they share. There's a role for the university in these cases. But the bottom line is, if you know that these students won't go to the cops, you still have to do something about it, because what happens is it results in a loss of educational opportunities, which is a violation of Title IX. So the university, as uncomfortable as it is for them, must act.
And Lisa, what do you think? Because you seem to go straight to the police.
Let's go to over here to my left. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to wrap this up.
They have a lot of support, and we can get them there, and we can push.
It would be great.
It's better.
We can have this. We can continue this dialogue outside, but over here.
So my question is, do you see any difference in terms of race or ethnicity, in terms of women being willing to either come forward, or even in terms of conviction? Are there any statistical differences?
I would love to answer that question. With my African American clients, there is so much less shaming, self-shaming, feeling bad, feeling guilty. Why did I go there? I would like them to be models for everybody else. I think there's just much better self-esteem. There's just anger, which is appropriate anger at the perpetrator where it should be. That's just anecdotally, what I've observed.
And I worked in the most diverse county in the United States, in Queens, for 22 years. And I will say that, victims were of every race, ethnicity, religion, and we had about a 90% conviction rate on cases, that we went to trial. And I really, and on campus as well, I see Columbia is an incredibly mixed population, and I have seen no real difference in terms of the number of successful outcomes depending on
Next question.
race.
First of all, I've known Lisa since she was a little kid. I'm very, very proud of her.
Hi, Susan.
I'd like to hear your opinion on the dilemma, or if you even think it's a dilemma, that there's a scale to discern among Al Franken as a comic doing a stupid photograph, put to Harvey Weinstein raping and then punishing people.
Yeah. Well, I can't comment a lot on Weinstein.
Well, anybody else.
But I think the scale is an important point. We cannot lump everyone together. And I do believe in due process. And I do believe people should have the right to defend themselves, and there should be investigations. I've represented a particular client I just mentioned where it went in a direction that was very shocking to me. I've also represented victims who the case went in a direction that was very shocking to me, and I had to withdraw as well. So all human beings are capable of lying, deception, or being benevolent, wonderful people. We have to have, I think, decent, fair investigations. Now, quick one about Les Moonves at CBS, for example, who's been accused, who's still there, who's still in place, despite multiple women going on the record talking about him physically assaulting them. And they've hired 2 large defense firms to do the investigation. I can tell you how that's going to turn out. It's going to turn out the way that large defense firms always come out in these investigations. They don't hire plaintiffs' firms like mine to do these investigations, or even more neutral firms. In fact, why is it a law firm at all? Because they want to have attorney-client privilege. Why not have, you know, any one of a number of wonderful outside investigators that are not law firms come in? I think the investigation part is very important because, you know, we don't want to see people just taken down if it's not fair.
Okay, one final quick question and a quick answer, and we have to wrap it up. But unfortunately, this 50 minutes goes too fast, right?
Okay, I'll make it quick. I've been following the Brock Turner case, and my question is, where do you stand, Lisa, on the removal of judges who pass flimsy convictions?
Removal of judges who, I know the Brock Turner case.
Pass flimsy convictions, like what happened to...
convictions.
Yeah, well... Who pass, who very light, you mean who impose very light sentences.
Yeah.
I think he should be removed. And I don't say that lightly because I think judges should have broad discretion. But if you don't take sexual assault seriously in this day and age and you're going to give somebody a slap on the wrist, as I recall that case, the Brock Turner rape case, the swimmer, who we should now call a convicted rapist in Northern California, there were 2 witnesses who came along and saw him raping her. So this is not a close question. This is not a difficult case. And I think giving him a slap on the wrist is awful, and I think he should be removed.
We promised to be around to talk, okay? Wow, I've got a lobbying force back here.
Okay.
Quickly.
Step forward.
Okay, we're going to run a minute or 2 over.
Yeah. Yes.
So I know because of the MeToo movement, more and more people are coming out, which also leads to more and more skepticism. And I've noticed from a lot of younger people, people have come to me and asked, how do I believe these? Like, how do I know this is actually happening? How can I help educate younger people so that in the future they're more educated and can help progress the MeToo movement?
Okay.
Marjory, you want to answer that and wrap it up? And
first of all, it takes a lot of courage to go up to that microphone. So good for you.
I say good for you as well. I think that, are you in college?
No, I'm in high school.
Okay, so, you know, when you get to college, what you'll find is that there are an enormous number of organizations that work on these issues, and you can throw yourself into it. But you can also volunteer. You know, you can reach out to the National Women's Law Center, and what the MeToo
Time's Up
movement has a huge network of people. And, you know, I think it's just really important to keep getting out there, to keep marching, to keep talking to people, and talk to your friends, because that is the most important thing you can do.
And encourage them to stand up for their rights.
And to vote.
We have pretty good laws in place. We need people to stand up for their rights.
Okay, I think that's a fitting way to end this session. We thank you, panel. Thank you. And I leave you with one point, is that the responsibility for changing the lives of women around this issue depends on each and every one of us in this room. So let's take it on.
Absolutely.